The clockmakers promised the old clock tower stood at the center of Ashford Village, watching over generations as they came and went. Children grew into adults beneath its shadow. Couples met beneath its face. Merchants opened their shops to its morning chime and closed them at its evening song. For more than 100 years, the tower had never missed an hour. Not once. At least, that was what everyone believed. But on a cold autumn evening, the clock stopped. The hands froze at exactly 6:17. The bell remained silent. The village square, usually alive with familiar sounds, suddenly felt strange. People stepped outside their homes and stared upward. The silence felt heavier than anyone expected. A clock was only a machine, after all. Yet somehow its absence left a gap no one could explain. The mayor immediately called for Thomas Hale, the village clockmaker. Thomas was a quiet man in his late 60s who lived alone in a small stone cottage at the edge of town. For nearly 40 years, he had maintained the great clock. He knew every gear, every spring, every bolt hidden behind the tower's walls. When Thomas arrived and climbed the narrow staircase inside the tower, the villagers waited anxiously below. Hours passed. The moon rose. Finally, Thomas descended. His face carried an expression no one had ever seen before. Concern. Can it be fixed? The mayor asked. Thomas hesitated. Then he nodded slowly. Yes. Relief spread through the crowd. But it will take time. The villagers accepted his answer. After all, Thomas had never failed them. Yet as he walked home beneath the moonlight, a weight settled heavily upon his shoulders. Because he had not told them the whole truth. The clock's failure was not the real problem. The real problem was something hidden behind the largest gear in the mechanism. Something he had discovered only hours earlier. A small metal box. And inside that box was a letter addressed to him. Even more surprising, it had been written by his father. Thomas stopped walking. That was impossible. His father had died 35 years earlier. His hands trembled as he unfolded the yellowed paper. The ink had faded, but the handwriting remained familiar. My son, if you are reading this, then the clock has finally stopped. And if the clock has stopped, then it is time for you to learn why it was built. Thomas stared at the page. A chill ran down his spine. The village believed the tower had been constructed by wealthy merchants long ago. That was the story everyone knew. But according to the letter, the story was incomplete. Very incomplete. The next line changed everything. The clock was never built to measure time. It was built to keep a promise. Thomas read those words 3 times. Then 4. The wind rustled through the trees around him. For the first time in decades, he felt like a little boy again. Confused, curious, and slightly afraid. He hurried home and continued reading beneath the glow of a lantern. The letter told a story he had never heard before. More than a century ago, Ashford Village suffered a devastating winter. Snow buried the roads. Food became scarce. Many families considered leaving forever. Among them was a young schoolteacher named Eleanor Hart. Eleanor was known throughout the village for her kindness. She taught children whose parents could not afford lessons. She delivered meals to the elderly. She spent her evenings reading stories to anyone willing to listen. When the terrible winter arrived, she became the heart of the community. Every day she encouraged people not to lose hope. Every day she reminded them that difficult seasons eventually pass. But as the winter dragged on, Eleanor fell ill. The village doctor did everything he could. Still, her condition worsened. One evening, knowing her time was short, she gathered the villagers around her bedside. According to the letter, her final words were simple. Promise me something. The villagers listened. When brighter days return, don't forget each other. Tears filled many eyes. Eleanor continued. Hardship has brought this village together. When prosperity returns, promise me you will remain united. One by one, they agreed. The promise seemed easy at the time. Yet history often proves that promises made during hardship become difficult to keep during success. Years passed. The village recovered. Businesses flourished. Families prospered. Slowly, people became busy. The sense of community Eleanor cherished began to fade. That was when a group of villagers came together with an idea. They would build something permanent. Something that would remind future generations of the promise they had made. That something became the clock tower. Every hour, its bell would ring across the village, not merely to mark time, but to remind people that every hour offered an opportunity to help one another, to listen, to care, to remember. Thomas sat silently after reading the final paragraph. Outside, the village slept peacefully. Inside, his thoughts raced. His father had spent decades protecting this secret. Now the responsibility belonged to him. The next morning, Thomas returned to the tower, not to repair the clock immediately, but to search for more answers. Behind another panel, he discovered a second letter, then a third. Each contained stories of ordinary villagers who had quietly honored Eleanor's promise. A baker who provided free bread during difficult years. A farmer who shared harvests after storms destroyed neighboring fields. A teacher who purchased books for children using her own savings. None of their names appeared in history books. None sought recognition. Yet together they shaped the character of the village. As Thomas read, he began to understand something important. Great communities are rarely built by famous people. They are built by ordinary individuals performing small acts of kindness consistently over time. The realization stayed with him throughout the week. Meanwhile, villagers grew increasingly concerned about the silent clock. Without its familiar chimes, many felt as though something was missing. Eventually, the mayor organized a gathering in the square. People arrived expecting news about repairs. Instead, Thomas stood before them holding the letters. For the first time in his life, the quiet clockmaker addressed the entire village. He told them everything: the promise, the teacher, the hidden history, the purpose behind the tower. When he finished, silence filled the square. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Others reflected on how disconnected they had become from one another. Then an elderly woman stepped forward. "I never knew this story," she said softly, "but I would like to continue the promise." A shopkeeper nodded. "So would I." Then another voice joined, and another. Within minutes, dozens of people were speaking. The gathering transformed into something unexpected. Neighbors began discussing ways to help one another. Young people volunteered to assist elderly residents. Local businesses organized support for struggling families. For the first time in years, the village felt united. A week later, Thomas completed the repairs. The clock was ready. At sunset, the entire community gathered around the tower. Children sat on their parents' shoulders. Elderly residents stood beside lifelong friends. Everyone waited. The hands reached the hour. The great bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Its sound echoed across rooftops and fields. Yet this time, people heard something more than a bell. They heard a reminder. A reminder that life is measured by more than minutes and hours. It is measured by compassion, by generosity, by the promises we keep when no one is watching. Thomas looked toward the sky and smiled. The clock was working again. But more importantly, so was the village. And somewhere, perhaps, Eleanor's promise was still keeping time.